Inside a racing car, there was a man named Roy. In addition, there was a woman named Ingrid. She was Roy's pregnant wife. Roy then stopped and saw his enemy near their car by the train tracks. There was a man called TT. He was a racer just like Roy, but it turned out that TT was Roy's archenemy. Knowing that Roy's car was beside his car waiting for the train to pass, TT invited Roy to bet and race. Roy, whose prestige was high, agreed to TT's invitation to race. Roy's wife, who was sitting next to Roy's seat, didn't look scared. She also seemed ambitious to defeat TT. On the other hand, there were some elderly people standing silently, watching the cars of Roy and TT, who seemed to be about to start the race. Even though Roy's wife was pregnant, Roy was still brave enough to race. When the train passed by and the roadblock was lifted, they immediately hit the gas and the race was on. A few moments later, Roy tried to race the TT car. Unfortunately, Roy saw a big truck in front of Roy's lane, so Roy tried to avoid the truck, until Roy's car had to have an accident. Roy's speeding car finally stopped upside down. The first thing Roy worried about wasn't the condition of his wife who was pregnant, but Roy was more worried about the condition of his favorite car. Due to the accident, Roy suffered an injury to his shoulder. Meanwhile, Roy's wife Ingrid suffered a rupture of membranes as a result of the accident, so the child in her womb had to be born. Fortunately, Roy's daughter was born safely. At the birth of his child, Roy became a father figure for the first time. But at that time, Roy also had to go to jail for speeding offenses on the road. Long story short, 14 years later, after going through 2 divorces and 120 traffic violations, Roy then spent his days as an auto parts store owner. Roy still has the soul of a racer, despite having received so many traffic violations. One day, Roy was preparing to participate in an illegal race. However, his favorite car had not been prepared for the race. Roy wanted to leave his shop to his confidant. Soon Roy, who was outside the shop, saw Ingrid, his ex-wife, and her new family came to see Roy. They wanted to go on vacation. But it turned out that Nina, who was Roy and Ingrid's daughter, was not interested in going on vacation with her mother. So Ingrid entrusted her daughter to Roy. Knowing that, Roy felt uncomfortable with having Nina with him. Roy invited Ingrid to talk for a while. Roy said that he was busy preparing his favorite car that Roy would use for racing, in addition to the problem of returning goods at his shop and others. Roy showed an attitude that was still more concerned with cars and racing than thinking about his daughter. Roy and Ingrid argued a little, but finally Ingrid managed to get Roy to obey her. Ingrid then said goodbye to Nina and left with her new family. After her mother left, Nina was very excited to live with her father. However, Roy didn't act sweetly towards his daughter. He seemed indifferent to Nina. Nina enjoyed being in her father's workshop as she watched her father prepare his racing car. Unfortunately, Roy didn't return Nina's attention. He preferred to be with his new girlfriend named Angie. Angie was also a racer just like Roy. That the day came when the race event began. Roy, who was a regular winner, made it to the final round to compete for the champion title. Nina was present to watch her father race. When Nina found out that her father qualified for the finals, Nina was very proud of Roy. Before Roy continued his race, Roy took a break and checked his car's engine. Nina then approached her father. She showed Roy her pride, but Roy chose to be with the women. This made Nina angry, so Nina had the idea to trick her father by messing with Roy's car engine. Shortly after that, Roy returned to the circuit to race. When Roy was about to go fast, Roy felt something was wrong with his car. He passed a few meters and suddenly his car engine broke down. Roy couldn't win the race. This made Roy upset with everything. Moreover, there was a car that approached Roy by drifting around Roy. The car seemed to mock Roy, who could not get the champion title. Roy tried not to bother about the failure in the race event. Later that evening, Roy and the participant relaxed at the cafe. Not long after, Roy heard a noise outside. Roy then approached the sound, which turned out to be the sound of a car that blocked Roy when Roy's car broke down. This time the car also drifted around Roy. Then the driver got out of his racing car. Roy finally knew that it was TT, his archenemy. At that time, the participant also came out of the cafe to see Roy and TT, who seemed to be talking seriously. TT then invited Roy to race. At first, TT invited him to race to a place that Roy felt was too close. Finally, TT upped the distance further. Roy challenged him back to Nordkap, which was a headland that was the northernmost area of the northernmost European continent. TT initially felt it was too far, but he would still take the challenge. They agreed to the race challenge. The race would start tomorrow night, so they had to get ready. In the morning, Roy again prepared his Mustang car for the race. Nina was again just an observer, and Roy ignored her. Long story short, night came. Roy and the other racers gathered at the cafe where they had stayed the night before. It seemed that the other racers wanted to join the race. Among the many racers, there were two men named Dauphin and Nabakin. They were Roy's best friends. They also decided to join the race with Dauphin's son, named Jimmy. The two men joined the race to accompany Roy because they were worried about Roy. Dauphin also reasoned that he could show his son Jimmy the sights of Norway. Nina learned that her father's friend was taking his son to the races. This made Nina want to race with Roy like Jimmy, who went with Dauphin. Nina tried to insist on going with Roy, but Roy refused his daughter's wishes. Nina was not easily discouraged, and she even hid in the back of the car. However, Roy still told her to stay with her grandmother at home. Nina looked upset at her father, who didn't let her participate. Then the racers collected their bet money, even though it was small, but prestige was more important to them. Then they prepared for the race, until the group of racing cars was allowed to drive. There were many cool race cars there, such as Mustang, Toyota BMW, Ferrari, Camaro, Maserati, and other cool cars. From the edge of Oslo, they entered the city lane to take the highway. On the way, they were followed by other drivers who were happy to see that there were many cars in a group. Some of the cars were caught by the police because they were speeding in the middle of the city. Soon the riders were on the edge of Oslo. They then set their pace to be faster than before. Roy seemed to be enjoying the ride, singing, and even ignoring his mother's calls. Dauphin's car was behind Roy's car. Dauphin and Nabakin apparently brought Nina and Jimmy with them. Nabakin couldn't bear to see Nina sad, because she was left behind by Roy. Finally, he allowed Nina to ride in his car while accompanying Jimmy. While Roy was focused on the race, TT, who was a provocative person, called Roy. He tried to make Roy become emotional. Luckily, Roy didn't fall for TT's spile. A few moments later, Roy saw something on the side of the road. He finally stopped and saw that Nina was on the side of the road. Roy also knew that Jimmy, Dauphin, and Nabakin were peeing there. Roy was surprised to see his daughter there. Dauphin and Nabakin then approached Roy and said that they had to take Nina with them. They chose to do this because they couldn't bear to see Nina sad. In addition, Dauphin also scolded Roy because Roy could have used this race to get closer to his daughter. Then Dauphin and Nabakin deliberately left Nina there so that Roy could take Nina to his car. Roy could do nothing but allow Nina to come with him. Nina finally got into her father's racing car with a sense of excitement because finally her efforts to race with her father were successful. Then Roy told Nina to call her grandmother, who apparently had called Roy 23 times, but Roy didn't pick up his mother's call. Moreover, it was proven that Nina came with Dauphin and Nabakin without telling her grandmother. Meanwhile, in Dauphin's car, Nabakin complained to him that he had chest pains. Nabakin suggested that they just go home, but Dauphin felt that their journey was already exhausting. So, Nabakin, who lost the vote, followed Dauphin. It was already dawn. The riders passed through a very beautiful and soothing area. The quiet atmosphere made the roar of the racers' cars heard by someone who was camping and fishing. The man then climbed up the hill to see the situation around him. He asked for a helicopter to pick him up. This man, Philip Mork, was a police officer. When the helicopter arrived, Philip monitored the situation from above. He smelled that there was an illegal race. Philip continued to follow the race car. On the other hand, two racers made it to the first checkpoint at a gas station. The participants were required to fill up with gas and get proof of purchase. When Roy arrived at the gas station, TT had already finished refueling. TT then mocked Roy because he was late. He then immediately sped off, leaving Roy, who was still at the gas station. After Roy filled up the gas, he went to the supermarket there. He bought a drink and bread. After he filled up his tank with fuel, Roy immediately stepped on the gas to catch up with the others. Roy saw that Nina was tired and sleepy. Then Roy gave her bread for breakfast. But the longer Nina choked and her face turned red. It turned out that Nina was allergic to foods that contained nuts. Roy just realized that the bread was mixed with nuts. Roy panicked because Nina was getting difficult to breathe. Thankfully, their location was close to the city center. Roy immediately looked for the nearest hospital. When they arrived at the hospital, Nina was immediately treated. Not long after, Nina felt better. Roy didn't think about the race because he was concerned with his daughter's safety at that time. However, Nina invited her father to continue the car race. Nina felt it was useless, that she almost died if her father lost the race. Nina immediately put on her jacket and shoes, then left. Eventually, Roy followed his daughter's wishes, even though Roy was worried about Nina's health. While Dauphin and Nebakin arrived at the gas station. Apart from that, they met Roy's girlfriend. Soon a man saw Dauphin's car engine. He then realized that they were race participants from Oslo. At first, Dauphin and Nebakin didn't admit that they were race participants. But after the man told them about the news of the roadblock, Dauphin finally admitted that he was a participant. The man then offered to do them a favor. Then Jimmy sent a message to Nina and told her the news about the roadblock by the police. Roy realized that Nina had exchanged her number with Jimmy. Instead of being worried about the news, Roy was worried about his daughter because he was afraid Nina would become more out of touch. However, Roy remained focused on the race and followed the information. He decided to join the rest of the group as well as Dauphin. When Roy arrived at the location, he found out that the road had been blocked. Some racers were also arrested by the police. All these were the orders of a police officer named Philip Mork. Soon Philip arrived at the location. Roy and the others watched from a distance. The local man who met Dauphin at the gas station told them to wait until a large tractor arrived. The tractor was used to harvest wheat in the region. They then rode in convoy behind the tractor. So, while the tractor went through the field making a path for the racers, the local boys' cars came forward and blocked the road. Therefore, the police could not move. Then the cars of the participants passed the police one by one. So did TT, who was apparently monitoring the movements of Roy and the others. Philip, who saw them escape the roadblock, was upset. He then asked the helicopter to come down at that time. Then Philip took one of the local boys' car and followed the race participants. After a while, the participants entered a deserted area. So they started overtaking each other. As they got closer to the finish line, the violence started. A participant threw an object at the windshield of Dauphin's car. This caused the windshield to crack. They finally decided to find a windshield repair shop. After the windshield was repaired, Dauphin's car accelerated. They didn't realize that Philip was waiting for them at the repair shop. Seeing that, Philip immediately followed Dauphin's car. Meanwhile, far ahead, a battle between Roy's Mustang and TT's Toyota took place. TT's car then cornered Roy's car. TT also pushed Roy's car so that Roy left the asphalt track and headed for the dirt track in the middle of the forest. Roy's car then plunged, and luckily, they managed to land on a trailer truck. Roy and Nina laughed as they watched the car jump. Roy was surprised to see Nina, who always managed to survive a deadly accident. Then Roy told the story of what had happened when Nina was about to be born. That was when Roy and Ingrid had an accident while they were racing cars. Roy also said that Roy was not a very ignorant father. It could be seen that his yellow Mustang car was a manifestation of his love for Nina, because when Nina was born, she had jaundice. After a while they talked, Roy then decided to take his car off the trailer truck. Roy then told Nina to get ready because Roy would do a backward walk so that the car would run on the asphalt again. They then continued their journey with a happy feeling. Then Nina tried to talk to her father again. Nina's meant to joke. Nina said that she was the one who sabotaged Roy's car engine during the final in the previous race, which resulted in her father losing the match. Unfortunately, Roy, who heard his daughter's statement, didn't think it was a joke. Roy was annoyed with Nina, who was presumptuous in messing with his car. Nina, who knew that her father was upset, then decided to keep quiet. The situation in the car was no longer lively with their jokes, but became silent and awkward. Moments later, Roy arrived at a harbor. Roy entered the car into a ferry before the ship departed. The participants had to cross the island to reach their destination. This was because their destination, Nordkapp, was on a different island, which was not too far away. On the ferry were already TT's car, Dauphin, Angie's car, and one Swedish participant's car. The rest of the candidates who didn't make it onto the ferry couldn't win the race. Philip's car was unable to catch them on the ferry. Philip then contacted the police in the Nordkapp area. Philip told the police there to block the harbor. Meanwhile, the ferry drove to Nordkapp. The participants on board chose to rest. Nybacken then complained about the pain in his chest. Those who heard that laughed and thought Nybacken was exaggerating the pain. Time went by so fast, and the ferry was almost on the island. The participants got out to check their cars. On the other hand, Angie saw police cars lined up to block the harbor. Then Angie's friend had an idea to escape from the roadblock. Meanwhile, Nina saw that her father's car tire was getting thin. Nina then told Roy about it, but Roy ignored his daughter's words. Roy didn't want his enemy to tease him and his car. So, Roy got into his car and prepared to get out of the ferry. After the ferry docked, a tractor exited the ferry first. The tractor deliberately hit the two cars, which blocked their way out of the ferry. It turned out that the tractor was run by Angie's friend. The woman was happy to get rid of the cars that blocked their way. She then got into Angie's car and continued their race. Likewise, Roy, TT, and Dauphin continued their journey. They sped away from the harbor. They passed through a road with a very beautiful view. The road was lined with beautiful cliffs and mountains, and the breeze made the participants sleepy, and they were tired from the long journey. It was different with Roy, whose physical condition was still strong. Roy then spurred his car until he managed to overtake the participants' cars one by one. Roy managed to be in the very first position. But not long after, when Roy managed to overtake all the cars, Roy felt that his car was getting shaky. Roy then stopped on the side of the road and checked the condition of his car. It turned out that Roy's car tire was out of shape. Seeing that, Nina scolded her father, who did not want to change the car tire while on the ship. Finally, when Roy changed the tire, the other participants sped away, leaving Roy behind. Nina became more annoyed with her father, who was hard to tell. Once the new tire was in place, Roy sped off in his car. But the distance was too far, and Nina didn't want to see her father lose in vain. Nina checked the map and saw that there was a bypass. Roy thought that the bypass was very dangerous, but they had no other way. Roy finally obeyed Nina and took the rocky bypass. Until they almost reached the asphalt road, but they had to go down a steep cliff. Fortunately, they made it through and landed on the asphalt road. TT, who saw his great enemy, made it. He then pulled out his drift skill to get through the winding road. Due to that skill, TT managed to be in the front position, overtaking the other cars. On the other hand, Dauphin was focused on the race until he saw Nybacken looking unconscious. Dauphin was panicking and told Roy, who was next to his car. Roy, who saw it, was shocked beyond belief. However, Roy didn't invite Dauphin to stop, but went even faster. On a straight line, Roy managed to beat other cars. He even beat TT's car, but Roy let his enemy's car crash into Roy's car. He deliberately let Dauphin's car carrying the dead Nybacken be in the first position. After that, Roy followed Dauphin's car and came in second place. Soon they reached their destination, Nordkapp. When they got there, Dauphin gave a speech about Nybacken's death to the other participants before the police arrived. Nina was proud to see her father, who was willing to lose to his friend. Then Dauphin pushed the car with the dead Nybacken into the ravine. The other participants were saddened to know that Nybacken had died. At the same time, the police arrived and arrested them for their consequences.